Some men are born into money and spend the rest of their lives mistaking it for armor. They move through the world at full volume. Loud voices, louder cars, the kind of entitlement that fills a room before they even walk through the door. They have never truly been stopped. Not by a teacher, not by a judge, not by a father who was always too busy writing checks to write consequences. So they grow. And the thing they grow into is the kind of person who believes, at the very bottom of their bones, that other people exist for their convenience. Tyler Harrington III was 24 years old, the heir to a billion-dollar real estate dynasty, and the clearest example of that kind of man you will ever meet in a single story. On a Tuesday evening in Manhattan, he walked into one of the most quietly powerful restaurants in the city, and within the hour did something that took less than 3 seconds. He picked up a full cup of scalding hot coffee, and he poured it onto the hand of a waitress. He laughed when he did it. He sat back down. He never once looked behind him. He should have, because sitting in the private corner booth, barely 6 feet from where Tyler was laughing, was a man who had not moved, had not spoken, had not even put down his book. A man with cold, unhurried eyes, a glass of single malt whiskey at his right hand, and a black Belgian Malinois sitting at his feet like a shadow with a heartbeat. His name was Jin-ho Park, and Tyler Harrington had just made the last careless mistake of his comfortable life. The restaurant was called Sora. You will not find it on any app. There is no website, no reservation portal, no review page anywhere on the internet. You learned about Sora the same way you learned about every other thing that truly mattered in New York City, because someone who had already been there told you about it. And if they told you, it meant they had already decided you were worth the information. The building sat on a quiet block in the West Village, its only exterior marking a small bronze plaque beside the door, engraved with a single Japanese character. Inside, the ceilings were high and dark. The lighting was warm and amber, calibrated so that every conversation felt private, every table its own small island. The walls were lined with cedar that had been aged for 40 years before installation, and the faint smell of it mixed with the kitchen smoke in a way that you would remember for days after. Chef Kenji, Korean-Japanese, 2 Michelin stars, a wait list that stretched the better part of a year for anyone without a standing arrangement, ran the kitchen with the same philosophy that governed everything else about the place. Nothing wasted, nothing performed, everything exactly what it needed to be. Sora had 40 or so guests who held permanent reservation cards, matte black. No name printed on them, no number, just the bronze character from the front door, embossed in the center. These guests, a quiet collection of financiers, old money families, a federal judge, 2 foreign diplomats, and several people whose professions were not listed anywhere, came and went through Sora the way people move through a room they considered their own. Because it was. Jin-ho Park had been coming here for 11 years. He always sat in the same corner booth, back to the wall, facing the entrance, the kind of position a man chose when he had spent enough years in enough rooms to understand that a clear sightline to the door was not paranoia, it was just good sense. His table was set the same way every visit, his whiskey at the right, a small glass of water at the left, and whatever he was reading placed open face down while he ate, then picked up again the moment his plate was cleared. That Tuesday, he was 60 pages into a Korean translation of Marcus Aurelius. The whiskey was Ardbeg, neat, untouched since it had been poured. The soba noodles in front of him were half finished. At his feet, on a slim padded mat that the staff kept specifically for him, lay Shadow. If you have never been in the presence of a working Belgian Malinois, it is difficult to describe the quality of attention those animals carry. Shadow was 6 years old, 65 pounds of muscle arranged with the efficiency of something designed rather than evolved. He was black from ears to tail, with amber eyes that moved through a room the way a security camera moved, constantly, deliberately, missing nothing. Jin-ho had raised him from 8 weeks old, trained him personally, and in 6 years had developed the kind of partnership with that dog that most people never managed with another human being. Shadow could read a room. He could read the people in it. He understood the difference between a man walking toward the table because he worked there and a man walking toward the table because he intended something. That Tuesday evening, Shadow was lying down, ears up. Tuesday nights drew a particular kind of crowd, quieter than weekends, more deliberate, people who came to eat slowly, to think, to conduct conversations that deserved the kind of privacy that Sora provided. And then the door opened, and everything in the room changed its frequency. Tyler Harrington did not enter rooms. He declared them. He was 24 and looked it in the way that only money could arrange. The kind of grooming and tailoring and cosmetic maintenance that transformed an ordinary face into something that photographed well and said nothing. White blazer, designer, the kind of price tag that got mentioned in conversations about the white blazer. Hair styled with the precision of someone who had a person for that. A laugh that arrived at full volume before anything was actually funny. Because for Tyler, the laugh itself was the performance, not the punchline. He came in with 2 men who traveled in the specific orbit of people like Tyler, not friends, exactly, but satellites. Men who laughed a half beat after Tyler laughed and agreed before Tyler finished sentences, whose entire function in the dynamic was to confirm that Tyler was the most interesting person in whatever room they occupied. Beside him was his girlfriend Cassandra, who was beautiful in a professional way and wore the expression of someone who had been bored for so long that the boredom had become a personality. The maitre d', a man named Henri, who had spent 30 years managing exactly this kind of entrance in exactly this kind of room, moved to intercept them with the smooth, unhurried grace of someone who had seen everything and was prepared to be surprised by nothing. There was no reservation under the Harrington name. Henri informed Tyler of this with the same composed courtesy he extended to everyone. Tyler looked at him the way a man looks at something temporarily in his way. He told Henri with the casual certainty of someone who had never once been told that a thing was simply not possible, that his father had called ahead, that the name was Robert Harrington, and that Henry's book was wrong. When Henry explained gently that the book was not wrong, Tyler suggested Henry call his father directly, as if the matter could be corrected by escalating to the right adult. Henry did not call anyone. He moved a couple from a table near the window, apologizing warmly, offering them a complimentary wine, and seated Tyler's group with the efficiency of a man who had long ago made peace with the fact that some problems were better managed than argued. In the corner, Shadow's ears moved. Jin-ho did not look up. At the table, Tyler ordered immediately and without ceremony, rattling items off a menu he had barely glanced at, changing 2 selections mid-order without warning, and responding to a quiet, clarifying question from his server by telling her flatly that he had already answered that. Her name was Maya Chen. She was 22 years old, working 4 nights a week at Sora while finishing her final year of nursing school at NYU. She had the kind of professional composure that only came from real practice, the ability to absorb rudeness without it landing on her face. She smiled in the way that meant nothing personal, took the full order with a precision that required no notebook, and walked back toward the kitchen with her back straight and her expression unchanged. She had been doing this long enough to recognize the type. She had also learned through experience that the shift ended eventually, and then the type went home. What she had not learned yet, what she had no reason to expect, was that this particular type had chosen the wrong room on the wrong Tuesday. 45 minutes into the meal, Tyler's table had moved through a bottle of wine and a second round of cocktails. The volume had risen incrementally, the way it always did when men like Tyler were given enough drink and an audience that was already conditioned to agree with them. Tyler was mid-story. Something about a development deal in Miami, a number with a lot of zeros, a moment where his father had outmaneuvered a competing firm. The story, like all of Tyler's stories, was primarily a mirror, every detail angled to reflect back onto the teller. Maya approached the table to refresh the coffee. The cups at Sora were hand-thrown ceramic, each one slightly individual, commissioned from a potter in Kyoto. They held 4 ounces. Maya carried the pour pot the way she always did, 2 hands balanced, the practiced care of someone who understood that a restaurant was a place where small things, done precisely, kept everything running. What happened next was a matter of geometry. Tyler, building to the part of his story where he wanted to indicate scale, swept his right arm outward in a wide, theatrical gesture. His elbow caught the edge of the pour pot. A small amount of coffee splashed onto the white tablecloth. Tyler went very still. He looked at the tablecloth. He looked at the pour pot. He looked at Maya. And in the space of that second, something moved through his expression that had nothing to do with the accident, because it wasn't really about the tablecloth, and it had never been about the coffee. It was about the interruption, the inconvenience, the way his story had been broken by someone who was not supposed to matter. Maya was already reaching for a napkin, already beginning the sentence that started with, "I'm so sorry," even though she had nothing to be sorry for. Tyler told her, in a tone that was more frightening than shouting because it was so controlled, that she had knocked into him, that she had no idea how clumsy she was. He said this as if issuing a verdict. Maya kept her voice even. She kept apologizing. She kept reaching for the cloth to clean what had spilled. Tyler picked up his coffee cup. It was full. It was still steaming. And he tipped it over her hand. Not a splash. Not an accident. A slow, deliberate pour, the kind that required intention, required him to hold the cup at the angle and keep it there, while the scalding liquid ran over the back of Maya's hand and wrist. He was looking directly at her while he did it. Not with anger, with something quieter and more deliberate than anger, the expression of a man making a point. Maya's breath left her in a sharp gasp. She pulled her hand back against her chest. Her eyes filled immediately, not with the emotion of someone overwhelmed, but with the specific, involuntary response of a body in pain trying to process what the mind hadn't yet caught up to. Tyler set the cup back down on the saucer. He said calmly that maybe that would help her pay attention. One of his friends laughed. It was the short, uncertain kind of laugh. The laugh of a person who has not yet decided whether something is funny or terrible, and has defaulted to the reflex because the silence was worse. Tyler picked up his fork. Cassandra looked at her phone, and in the far corner of the room, the man in the gray suit, who had not moved, had not raised his voice, had not given any outward sign that he had witnessed any of what just happened, slowly closed his book. He set it on the table. He looked at his dog. Chief Shadow was already on his feet, not lunging, not growling, simply standing, facing Tyler's table with the precise, unwavering attention of an animal that has just classified something. Jin-ho looked at his dog for a moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he told Shadow in Korean to be still. Shadow sat, but he did not look away. There is a specific kind of power that has no public face. It does not appear on Forbes lists or show up at press conferences. It does not attend charity galas or release statements to the media. It does not announce itself, threaten you, or need you to know it exists. It operates through relationships built across decades, through favors given at exactly the right moment, through the slow, patient accumulation of things owed and things remembered. Jin-ho Park had been building that kind of power since he was 19 years old. He was born in Busan in 1973, the second son of a fisherman who had borrowed money from the wrong organization and spent Jin-ho's entire childhood trying to work out from under the weight of that debt. By the time Jin-ho was 14, he understood leverage and fear and the difference between the kind of power that needed to be displayed and the kind that simply needed to be real. He arrived in Los Angeles at 19 with $200, one contact name on a folded piece of paper, and a quality of stillness that people who met him remarked on without being able to explain. Within 3 years, he was running security for a Korean business network that operated across the West Coast. Within 7, he effectively was the network, the organizing intelligence behind it, the person people called when the problem was too complicated for the tools they already had. He moved to New York at 32. He opened a restaurant in Koreatown, a real restaurant, not a front, a place that made genuine food and employed 30 people and was, by any measure, a good business. Then another restaurant, then a commercial real estate portfolio that now held 19 properties across Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens. Then a private security consulting firm that worked with 3 governments and 12 corporations whose names you see every day on buildings and products without thinking about who else they also know. On paper, a successful businessman. Net worth somewhere north of $400 million, depending on the quarter. Korean-American community pillar, occasional philanthropist. Off paper, something more specific and considerably more difficult to categorize. He was the man you called when the problem existed in the space between legal and illegal, between public and private, between what could be proven and what simply needed to stop. He knew which city officials had financial arrangements they preferred to keep quiet. He knew which port authorities had approved shipments that did not appear in any public manifest. He had been present, directly or through people he trusted, for enough private conversations in enough powerful rooms that the people in those rooms thought twice, sometimes 3 times, before making a move that contradicted his interests. He was not a violent man. He had been once, in his lean years, his younger years, when there were fewer tools available. But he had come to understand, through experience, that violence was the last resort of the unimaginative. It created attention. Attention created complications. And complications at his level were simply inefficient. What he preferred was what he thought of as architecture, building situations carefully from the periphery inward, placing the right pressure on the right point at the right time, until the person he was dealing with found themselves standing in a room they had walked into willingly, looking around at the walls and slowly understanding that there were no doors. Tyler Harrington had no idea any of this existed. He had sat 6 feet from this man for the better part of an hour and had never once registered him. He also had no idea that the dog had already memorized his scent. Jin-ho watched the server named Maya walk quickly toward the kitchen, her burned hand pressed against her chest. He watched one of the kitchen staff intercept her at the swinging door, look at her hand, and immediately direct her toward the back office where the first aid kit was kept. He watched Tyler pick up his fork and resume his story from roughly the point where the coffee had interrupted it. Jin-ho looked at his phone. He made 3 calls over the next 11 minutes, each one short, each one quiet enough that the tables on either side of him could not have made out a word. To anyone watching, he looked like a man handling a scheduling matter, something minor, no urgency. The first call was to a man named Dennis Kwan. Dennis was a senior investigator in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office who had, 8 years prior, found himself facing an allegation that would have ended his career if it had ever surfaced fully. It had not surfaced. in large part because of a quiet intervention that Jin-ho had arranged without being asked and without billing anyone. Dennis had understood from that point forward what that kind of intervention was worth. Jin-ho described what he had witnessed at Sora, a deliberate, intentional act of burning a service worker with scalding liquid. He gave Tyler's full name, table number, the server's name, and mentioned without elaboration that the restaurant had camera coverage of the dining room from multiple angles. The second call was to a woman named Laura Shin. Laura ran the most closely read commercial real estate newsletter in the Northeast, a private publication whose subscriber list was small, influential, and extremely attentive. Laura and Jin-ho had a relationship built on mutual usefulness. He gave her 3 sentences. 3 sentences were enough for Laura to begin making her own calls the following morning. The third call was to his personal attorney. A letter, he said, needed to be drafted. The subject was a civil claim on behalf of a young woman named Maya Chen. He wanted documentation of the injury, the intentional nature of the act, and the medical costs covered before the week was out. His attorney, who had worked with Jin-ho for 16 years and had stopped being surprised by him somewhere around year 4, said he would have a draft to the Harrington family's legal team by the following afternoon. Jin-ho put his phone face down on the table. He picked up his whiskey. He took 1 sip. He opened his book. At Tyler's table, the second bottle of wine had just been uncorked. The waiter, Michael, passed Jin-ho's booth a few minutes later and gave him a brief, quiet nod, a nod that meant Maya was okay. Shaken. The burn was real, but she was okay. Jin-ho acknowledged this with the smallest movement of his chin. Then he returned to Marcus Aurelius. He read for another 22 minutes before the restaurant's ambient sound returned to the level where it had been before Tyler walked in. Tyler's table eventually paid, left a tip that was as performative as everything else he did, and walked out the way they had walked in, loud, unaware, already forgetting the room. Tyler did not know the name of the server he had burned. He had already forgotten her face. Maya woke up Wednesday morning with a bandaged right hand, a prescription for burn treatment on her nightstand, and a notification on her phone that she read 3 times before she believed it. It was from NYU's financial aid office. Her outstanding balance, $14,000 that she had been quietly managing with a payment arrangement that stretched over the next 16 months, had been paid in full the previous evening by an anonymous donor. There was also a voicemail left at 11:47 at night from a number she did not recognize. The voice was calm and male and carried a slight accent she could not immediately place. It told her simply that the caller had been dining at Sora the previous evening and had seen what happened to her, that what was done to her was wrong, that it would not go unanswered, that she did not need to do anything, that she should focus on her studies and her recovery. That was all. Maya sat with her phone in her uninjured hand for a long time. She did not know who had called. She would not know for another 4 days. When she found out, she would understand, looking back, either that the voicemail was one of the most precise acts of kindness she had ever received, because it gave her the outcome without requiring anything from her at all. Across the city, in a penthouse apartment on Park Avenue, Tyler Harrington was eating breakfast on his terrace 62 floors up, reading a lifestyle profile about his father's development company, in which Tyler himself was mentioned twice in favorable terms. He was feeling the specific contentment of a man who believes his life is perfectly designed, and he had not thought once about the waitress. He would begin thinking about a great many things by the end of the day. By Wednesday afternoon, a formal complaint had been logged with the NYPD by a detective who had spoken to 3 witnesses at Sora and reviewed footage from 2 dining room cameras that captured the incident from different angles. The charge was first-degree assault in the second, a charge that, under New York state law, applied to any intentional act causing physical injury by means of a dangerous instrument. Scalding liquid, case law had established clearly, qualified. By Thursday morning, two of Harrington Development's primary financing partners had reached out to the firm's CFO with quiet inquiries about their exposure to the company, citing reputational review. Neither partner mentioned who had prompted the inquiry. Neither needed to. By Thursday afternoon, a civil claim on behalf of Maya Chen had been formally delivered to the Harrington family's legal team. The documentation was, according to the Harringtons' own attorney, immaculate. The kind of immaculate that came from someone who had been doing this for a long time and had never once needed to cut corners. Robert Harrington II, Tyler's father, a man who had been managing crises since before Tyler was born and who had become, out of sheer necessity, extremely good at it, found himself doing something he almost never did. He found himself unable to find a door. The city contact who had twice helped smooth matters over for the family did not return his call. The journalist who had in the past been willing to consider the family's perspective before running a difficult story ran a brief, clean item noting that Tyler Harrington III was under criminal investigation for assault. The DA's office cited an ongoing investigation and declined to discuss it further. Robert, methodical and unsentimental, called a business partner with deep connections across New York's Korean-American business community and asked him carefully whether he had any sense of what was driving this. The partner was quiet for longer than a pause usually lasted. He told Robert that he needed to ask Tyler one specific question. He needed to ask his son exactly what he had done on Tuesday night at a restaurant called Sora. And then, the partner said, Robert needed to hope that the answer was something he could fix. Robert called his son. Tyler told him about the waitress. He framed it as an accident, a reaction to her clumsiness, something that had been blown entirely out of proportion. He used the word ridiculous twice. Robert, who had spent 50 years reading situations and people with the precision of a man whose livelihood depended on it, listened without speaking. Then he asked his son one question. He asked him to describe who had been seated near their table. Tyler thought about it. He shrugged inside his own memory. He mentioned vaguely some older Korean man in the corner with a big black dog. That was all he remembered. Robert Harrington put his phone down on his desk. He placed both hands flat on the surface in front of him. He breathed. He had heard the name Jin-ho Park twice in his career, both times in the context of men who, afterward, found themselves quietly unable to operate in the city at the level they had been operating at before. Not destroyed, not arrested, not touched in any way they could point to, simply restructured. As if the air around their operations had changed composition and the thing they had been building no longer grew the way it used to. Robert picked up his phone again. He called his partner back and confirmed the name. The partner confirmed it. There was a long silence. Then Robert said something he had not said out loud in many years, that he did not know how to fix this one. Tyler Harrington, who had not been told who Jin-ho Park was, only that his father was handling something, that he should stay home, that he should not talk to anyone, lasted approximately 18 hours before deciding that he had sat still long enough. He had been raised in a very specific school of thought. Confrontation resolved things. Money resolved things. Physical presence applied with confidence communicated to the other party that they were dealing with someone who was not going to be managed. Tyler had watched his father operate this way his entire life, and it had always, until this week, appeared to work. He drove to the West Village on Friday evening, walked into Sorza without a reservation, moved past Henry before Henry could intercept him, and scanned the room. Corner booth, gray suit, black dog. Tyler walked over. He stood at the edge of the table and announced his name, the way he always announced it, as if it were a credential, as if it were supposed to do something to the air in the room. He told this man, whoever he was, that he did not know what game was being played, but that it was going to stop. Shadow rose from the floor. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply stood up, all 65 pounds of him, and faced Tyler with a quality of attention that was more unsettling than aggression, because it was so completely without fear. It was the look of an animal that had assessed a situation and reached a conclusion and was now simply waiting for the situation to confirm it. Tyler stopped mid-sentence. Jin-ho had not looked up from his book. He turned a page. He read for a moment. Then, without raising his eyes, he told Tyler to sit down. His voice was quiet, not soft, quiet. The kind of quiet that belongs to people who have never needed volume, because what they said had always been heard anyway. Tyler, who was used to being the person who set the terms of interactions, said, "Excuse me," in the tone of someone who was not actually asking to be excused. Jin-ho told him again, sit down or leave. Those were his options. He recommended sitting. Something shifted in the room. It was not a visible thing. It was the thing that happened in places where everyone but one person understood what was happening. Henri stood very still at the maître stand. Michael had stopped moving between tables. The other guests, people who had their own reasons to pay attention to rooms, had gone very quiet. Tyler sat down. Jin-ho closed his book. He set it on the table. He looked at Tyler. It was a specific kind of look, not hostile, not theatrical. The look of a man taking a complete inventory of something that he has already made a decision about. Tyler, who had been looked at his entire life with admiration and deference, and occasional calculated flattery, had never once been looked at this way. It was the look, he would think later, of a man who saw exactly what was there and had already accounted for all of it. Jin-ho said he was going to say 3 things. He said Tyler was going to listen. Tyler said nothing. The first thing, the young woman whose hand Tyler had burned would have every medical cost covered, her education funded in full, and a formal public apology from Tyler within 48 hours. The number had already been agreed upon between their attorneys. It was not open for discussion. The second thing, the criminal complaint that had been filed was not something Jin-ho had filed. Investigators had filed it based on camera footage and 3 witness statements. That process would proceed on its own terms. Jin-ho had not intervened in it and would not. That was the law doing what the law was supposed to do. He paused. He picked up his whiskey glass and set it back down without drinking from it. The third thing, he said, was not a legal matter. He told Tyler that he was 24 years old, that he had a father who had built something real from nothing, that he had resources and access and opportunity that the vast majority of the people on Earth would never see the edge of, and that he had chosen, with all of that, to pour hot coffee onto the hand of a 22-year-old woman who was working her way through nursing school because she had made him feel inconvenienced for 3 seconds. Tyler opened his mouth. Jin-ho raised one hand from the table. Not a dramatic gesture, barely a movement. The kind of thing a person did to indicate a door was closed, and Shadow made a sound, not a bark. Something lower and shorter than a bark. A single syllable of sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in the animal's chest and carried, in that syllable, the complete and unambiguous message that this was not the moment. Tyler closed his mouth. Jin-ho told him that he was not interested in destroying him, that destruction was wasteful and rarely necessary, that what he was interested in was correction, and that what happened from this point forward would depend entirely on whether Tyler understood the difference between being destroyed and being corrected, and whether he had the character to choose correctly. He opened his book again. He told Tyler that he could go. Tyler stood up. He looked at Jin-ho for a moment. He looked at Shadow. He looked at the room. which was watching him with the particular collective attention of people who all understood something that he was still in the process of understanding. He walked to the door. He left. Jin-ho found his page. He read. Shadow lay back down. The room exhaled. Tyler Harrington III issued a public statement 6 days after the incident at Sora. His attorneys had worked hard on the language, but the admission was real, and it was the first time in his life that he had said, in a document with his name on it, that he had done something wrong and that it was his fault. He accepted a plea arrangement on the criminal charge, a reduced count of third-degree assault, 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory counseling. His father's legal team had negotiated as hard as they knew how to negotiate. It was still the first consequence that had ever been allowed to stick. Maya Chen accepted the civil settlement. Her attorney declined to disclose the amount publicly. She completed nursing school the following spring and graduated with honors in a ceremony that her mother, her father, and her younger sister attended. She currently works in the intensive care unit of a hospital in Upper Manhattan, where she is, by all accounts of the people she works with, exactly as precise and reliable as she always was. Jin-ho Park returned to Sora the following Tuesday. Same table, same corner, same whiskey, same book. Shadow on the padded mat beside him, watching the room. Some weeks later, Robert Harrington, through his business partner, through 2 additional intermediaries, asked the question that had been sitting in his mind since the night he learned the name. He asked why Jin-ho Park had not simply taken the opportunity to end the Harrington family's ability to operate in this city. He had clearly the means, the access, the inclination given what he had witnessed. The question made its way back. Jin-ho's answer, as it was relayed through the same chain of intermediaries, was 3 words. It wasn't necessary, because the most powerful thing about a man like Jin-ho Park was never what he was capable of doing. It was knowing, with complete precision, how little was actually required. Tyler had made his noise. He had always made his noise. Jin-ho had simply made his point. And Shadow had gone back to sleep. Some people spend their whole lives being the loudest person in the room. And some people spend their whole lives making sure that the loudest person in the room eventually understands the rules. Jin-ho never raised his voice, not once. He just made 3 phone calls, sat back down, and let the architecture do what architecture does. And Shadow? Shadow just stood up. That was enough. If this story kept you locked in from the first sentence, hit subscribe right now. We put out a brand new story every single week. Different worlds, different characters. Same standard. Every story earns your time from the first line to the last. No filler, no confusion, just stories built to hit. Ring the notification bell so you're the first to know when the next one drops. And before you go, drop 1 word in the comments. Coffee. That's it. Just that 1 word. Let's see how many people made it all the way to the end of this one. See you in the next one.